The entire SEAL training range went dead silent the moment she walked through the gate. No badge, no uniform, no escort. Just a woman in a plain gray shirt and worn cargo pants, moving through a restricted military installation like she'd done it 1,000 times before, because she had. Commander Damon Reeves was the first to spot her. He laughed, loud enough for his whole team to hear. "Ma'am, the visitor center is back that way." She didn't stop walking, didn't look at him, just said quietly, "I'm not here for a tour." He stepped in front of her. 6'2", chest full of decorations, 15 years in naval special warfare. And the woman in the gray shirt looked up at him like he was a speed bump. Nobody on that range had any idea what was about to happen to all of them. If this story already has you leaning forward, don't go anywhere. Follow along until the very end, hit like if you want to see more, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The morning started like every other Monday at Naval Special Warfare Installation Kestrel Point, located on the eastern coast of Virginia, where the tree line ended and the Atlantic wind began. The base sat on a narrow strip of federal land between a military airfield and a restricted harbor, and it had the particular kind of quiet that only came from people who didn't waste words. The SEALs who trained there were Team 7, and they were good. They knew they were good, and that knowledge had a way of settling into a man's posture and changing the way he held himself around people who hadn't earned the same patches. Commander Damon Reeves ran Team 7 the way he'd always run things. Hard, fast, and with a very clear sense of who belonged in his world and who didn't. He'd made it through Bud/S the first time he'd attempted it, had a combat record that included 3 deployments to environments he still couldn't name in public, and had the kind of easy authority that came not from shouting, but from the quiet certainty that no one in the room was going to challenge him. He was 41 years old. He'd been running special operations training programs for the last 3 years. He knew exactly what a warrior looked like, which was why, when the woman appeared at the East Gate checkpoint that Monday morning, he didn't register her as a threat to anything except his schedule. Chief Petty Officer Wade Moreno was the first one to actually see her arrive. He was running a pre-brief near the equipment bay when the gate guard's voice came over the short-range radio, uncertain enough that Moreno caught it immediately. "Chief, we've got a civilian at the East Gate. No standard clearance card, no unit liaison on record. She's got a government ID, but it's—" The guard paused. "I'm not sure what to make of it." "Hold her there," Moreno said, and jogged over. The woman standing at the gate was somewhere in her mid-40s, though it was hard to say precisely. She was lean in the way that people who had spent years moving fast through hard terrain tended to be lean. Not thin, but reduced to function. Her hair was dark and cut practically short. The gray shirt she wore was a plain cotton blend, no logos, no insignia. Her cargo pants were the kind you could buy at any military surplus store, but they were broken in the specific way that only real use produced, the kind of wear that happened over years rather than days. She wore low-profile boots, no jewelry, nothing reflective. She handed Wade her identification without being asked. He looked at it again. The ID was real. He knew what government credentials looked like, had seen hundreds of them. But the classification markings on the edge of the card were unlike anything in his normal processing chain. He recognized the federal seal. The rest of the identifier codes meant nothing to him specifically, but they had the weight of something that sat above his pay grade. "Ma'am, can you tell me the nature of your visit?" "Official business," she said. Her voice was level. Not cold, not warm, just level. The way someone spoke when they didn't need to perform anything. "I'll need to contact my commander." "Go ahead." Reeves arrived 3 minutes later with 2 members of his senior staff and the particular expression of a man who had been interrupted during something important and hadn't decided yet how annoyed to be. He looked at the woman. He looked at Moreno. He looked at the ID. "Commander Reeves," Moreno said carefully. "She presented federal identification, but I don't have a liaison contact on record for her visit. I can see that." Reeves studied the woman directly. "Who sent you?" "My orders come through the Naval Special Warfare Command Oversight Office," she said. "I was told to report directly to the installation." Reeves tilted his head slightly. "Oversight." He said the word the way someone might describe a weather phenomenon they'd never personally encountered. with a mixture of theoretical familiarity and genuine skepticism. And what exactly is Oversight sending a civilian to Kestrel Point for? I'm not a civilian. He looked at her again. The gray shirt, the unmarked pants, marked the complete absence of any visible rank or unit affiliation. Behind him, he heard someone on his staff make a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was close enough to one that it carried. You don't have a rank on your person, Reeves said. No. You don't have a unit patch. No. And you walk through my east gate without a scheduled liaison. He crossed his arms. I've been running operations out of this installation for 3 years. I think I'd know if someone from Naval Special Warfare Oversight was supposed to be here today. Then perhaps someone didn't communicate the visit correctly, she said. That happens. It was the tone that got him, not the words. The tone was the particular tone of someone who had dealt with situations considerably more serious than a gate-side conversation and was not currently experiencing elevated stress. Reeves had heard that tone before, but usually it came from people whose rank he already knew. What's your name? He asked. Vargas, she said. Vargas. He repeated it. Do you have a first name? Elena. And your rank, Elena? She looked at him evenly. I'm here for official business. The staff member behind Reeves, Petty Officer Second Class Brian Holt, who had a history of saying things out loud that other people were only thinking, said, under his breath but loud enough, she doesn't have one. A couple of people heard it. A couple of people reacted to it. Nothing dramatic. Just the small atmospheric shift of amusement passing through a group. Reeves held up one hand without looking back, and the sound stopped. But his posture had already made a decision without him fully realizing it. He'd classified her. Not consciously, not cruelly, but automatically, the way every experienced military officer classified every person who entered their operational environment, and he'd filed her under, not one of us. Ms. Vargas, he said, shifting the courtesy title in a way that communicated the shift in his assessment. This is a restricted training installation. Without a verified clearance chain and a scheduled visit on record, I can't authorize your access. I'm going to need you to wait at the administrative building while we contact the oversight office and verify your credentials. That will take hours, she said. Then it takes hours. She didn't argue. She didn't push back. She just looked at him with that same level expression and said, all right. And she waited. What Reeves didn't know, what nobody at Kestrel Point knew yet, because the communication breakdown was real and not her fabrication, was that the verification call was going to create a very specific kind of problem for him. The oversight office connected through standard channels at 0940. The administrative officer on duty, a young lieutenant named Prescott, who had been at Kestrel Point for 8 months and had developed a good instinct for knowing when a phone call was going to alter someone's day, took the call and listened for approximately 90 seconds before he set the receiver down, took a breath, and walked directly to find Commander Reeves. He found him at the live fire range overseeing a stress shooting drill. Commander, Prescott said, I need a word. Reeves stepped off the line. What is it? Prescott had the look of someone choosing his words very carefully. The woman at the gate, sir. The overview office confirmed her visit. They said... He stopped. Sir, they said her access level is full installation unrestricted. She has clearances that supersede standard unit command authority for the purpose of her evaluation. Reeves stared at him. Evaluation? Yes, sir. She's conducting a performance and training evaluation of Team 7's operations. Prescott paused again. The oversight coordinator I spoke with called her by name. She said, and I'm quoting, "You want to make sure Commander Reeves understands who he's dealing with." And who is she dealing with? Prescott handed him the printed confirmation sheet. The name on the official order header read, Vargas, Elena M., Senior Evaluation Advisor, Special Operations Command Oversight Division. Below her name was a service summary that Prescott had read 3 times to make sure he was interpreting it correctly. Reeves read it once. His jaw didn't move. His face didn't do anything visible. He folded the paper once and handed it back to Prescott. Bring her to the main briefing room, he said. Yes, sir. And get Moreno and the senior staff. Yes, sir. Reeves stood on the range for a moment after Prescott left, watching his team run the drill. They were good. They were very good, and he had spent the last 40 minutes treating their evaluator like a confused visitor who'd taken a wrong turn off the highway. He walked back to the installation with the kind of deliberate pace that gave nothing away. She was already in his briefing room when he arrived. She had taken a seat at the side of the table, not at the head, not making any claim to the room's hierarchy, and she was reviewing something on a tablet that she didn't put away when he walked in. She finished what she was reading, set it face down on the table, and looked up. "Commander Reeves," she said. "Ms. Vargas." He sat down across from her. Moreno and 3 senior petty officers took positions along the wall. "I apologize for the delay at the gate. There was a communication gap on our end." "I know," she said. "It wasn't your fault." The way she said it was direct enough that it wasn't quite an absolution and wasn't quite a criticism either. It was just an accurate statement, delivered without editorial. He noticed that. "My office received the confirmation of your visit," he said. "You're here to conduct a performance evaluation of Team 7's training program." "That's correct." "How long will the evaluation take?" "As long as it needs to." She folded her hands on the table. "I want to observe your training cycle, assess your protocols, and identify any gaps between your current methods and command-level standards. I'll need full access to your training schedule, your after-action reports from the last 6 months, and I'll want to observe your team in several training environments directly." "Including the CQC facility?" She looked at him. "Including the CQC facility." Reeves processed this. The close-quarters combat facility at Kestrel Point was the most sensitive training environment on the installation. A multi-room complex designed for urban warfare scenarios, with real-time performance tracking, thermal sensors, and an electronic scoring system that recorded everything from split-second decision-making to trigger discipline under stress. It had been built to evaluate the absolute best. Nobody without direct operational credentials was cleared to run scenarios in it. "Our CQC facility has access requirements," he said. "Physical participation requires verified tactical credentials." "I'm aware." "Your service summary," he paused. The summary Prescott had printed was thorough in certain ways and carefully incomplete in others. It listed her oversight role clearly. Her operational history, prior to the oversight appointment, was listed as classified at a level he didn't have clearance for. "I wasn't able to review your complete service record." "I know," she said again, without any self-satisfaction in it. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I'd like to understand what I'm working with, Ms. Vargas, before I hand you access to my team's operational training." "That's reasonable." "So I'm asking, directly, what is your operational background?" She held his gaze. "My operational background is classified." Behind Reeves, someone shifted their weight. Moreno, to his left, had gone very still in the particular way Moreno went still, when he was paying close attention to something. "Then I'm going to need you to understand my position," Reeves said, and his tone had shifted, still controlled, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "I don't bring unknown quantities into sensitive training environments. I don't care what the oversight confirmation sheet says. My job is to protect my team and the integrity of our operations, and until I know who I'm dealing with, I have to treat you as..." "As what?" she asked. He stopped. "As what, Commander?" She was watching him without heat, without challenge, just waiting for the answer. He didn't finish the sentence because the end of it wasn't something he wanted to say out loud in front of his senior staff. He settled for, "I need more information." "Then let's get you more information," she said, and stood up. "Take me to your equipment bay. I'll give you a demonstration." The equipment bay at Kestrel Point was large enough to store vehicles, and on a Monday morning it was occupied by 2 operators running gear checks and a junior petty officer doing inventory on a supply manifest. All 3 of them stopped what they were doing when Commander Reeves walked in with a woman in a gray shirt and the entire senior staff behind him. Nobody introduced anyone. Reeves gestured at the equipment wall, rack after rack of tactical gear, communications equipment, breaching tools, weapons systems, and said, "Go ahead." Elena Vargas walked along the wall without rushing. She stopped at a rack of communications equipment that the supply manifest listed as a newer generation of encrypted tactical radio systems. She picked up the handset, examined the frequency interface, identified the encryption key cycling mechanism, and set it back down. She said, "This is the TACOM 9 series. You're running the updated firmware, which means you've got the extended frequency range, but you'll have lag issues in the 380 band if you're operating in high RF environments. Has that come up in training?" Moreno, standing 2 feet to Reeves's right, looked at the commander without moving his head. Reeves didn't answer her directly. "Keep going." She moved down the wall, stopped at the breaching equipment, examined a hydraulic door ram with the particular attention of someone who'd used one in conditions where the difference between the right pressure calibration and the wrong one had meant something real. She set it back. She reached the weapons rack. There was an M4 carbine on the second tier, unloaded, with a standard training barrel. She looked at Reeves. He nodded once. She took it down. What happened next took 47 seconds. She cleared it, checked it was unloaded with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd done the same motion 10,000 times. Then field stripped it completely. Not slowly, not performatively, just quickly, with the precise economy of motion that came from years of doing the same thing in bad light under pressure. The pieces came apart in the right order, handled correctly, laid on the work surface beside the rack with the care that people who'd been trained right always gave to weapons. Then she reassembled it. 47 seconds, total. Petty Officer Holt, who earlier that morning had been quietly amused, was not amused now. He was doing math in his head, because he'd been doing the same field strip drill for 8 years, and his personal best was 63 seconds, and he knew what 47 seconds meant. Moreno said quietly, "Where did you train?" Elena set the assembled M4 back in its rack position with the barrel down and looked at him. "Places I can't tell you about," she said, "but the training was real." Reeves was watching her. Something in his posture had changed in a way that he wasn't fully managing. He'd spent 15 years in special operations, and he knew, the way experienced people knew things without being able to fully articulate them, that what he was seeing was not someone performing competence. It was someone for whom competence had become structural. It lived in the body. You couldn't fake that. He'd tried to train it into people who didn't have it, and he knew what the difference looked like. "The CQC facility," he said. "You want access. I want to observe a team run. And you want to participate." She met his eyes. "If you'll allow it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I set the scenario parameters." "Of course. You follow safety protocols to the letter. Always. And if you demonstrate that you can't handle the environment, if at any point I have safety concerns about your presence in the course, I pull you immediately. No argument." "Agreed," she said. He looked at her for another second. Then he said to Moreno, "Get the facility ready." The close quarters combat facility at Kestrel Point occupied a standalone building at the northeast corner of the installation, and from the outside it looked like nothing, just a long gray structure with reinforced walls and no windows. Inside it was a different world. The facility had been designed to replicate the interior of a multi-story urban structure. A series of interconnected rooms, corridors, and stairwells with movable walls, adjustable lighting, and a scenario control system that could simulate everything from a straightforward room-clearing drill to a full hostage rescue under active opposition. The electronic scoring system tracked 43 individual performance metrics in real time, including entry timing, muzzle discipline, threat identification accuracy, and decision lag under stress. The facility record for a solo run, single operator, no team support, was currently held by a master chief who had run the course 4 years ago during a command evaluation. His score had stood as something of a benchmark. Reeves set up the scenario himself. He was not trying to be fair. That was the truth he didn't say out loud, but that Moreno, watching him program the parameters at the control station, understood clearly. The commander set the difficulty at Operational Advanced, the level used for senior operators preparing for real-world deployment. Multiple threat actors, protected civilians, timed entries. Adaptive threat positioning that changed based on the operator's movement pattern. It was not the scenario you'd put an unknown quantity through on a first run. Moreno said, low enough that only Reeves heard him. "Sir." "She agreed to my parameters," Reeves said without looking up from the console. "She doesn't know what you're setting." "No," Reeves said. "She doesn't." He finished the setup, confirmed the scenario lock, and walked to the door. Elena was already suited up in the loner gear. Helmet, vest, the blue barrel training weapon that the facility used for live movement drills. She was adjusting the chin strap on the helmet with the automatic attention of someone running a pre-check, and she looked up when Reeves came over. "Ready?" he asked. "Tell me the objective," she said. 3-story structure. 6 threat actors, randomized positions, 4 protected civilians. Your solo entry south door, timed from breach. Objective is full structure clear with 0 civilian casualties. She processed this. Her face didn't do anything visible, but something in her eyes shifted. Not fear, not hesitation. Something more like recognition, like she'd seen this before, in a version that wasn't a training scenario. "Understood," she said. "Clock starts when the door opens." She nodded, moved to the south entrance, set her stance. The door opened. She was gone. The monitors at the control station lit up with real-time tracking data as she moved through the first room. The threat actors in the facility were automated mannequins on motorized mounts. They moved, they responded to proximity, and they registered clean hits versus sloppy passes with sensor precision. Reeves stood at the control station with Moreno and 4 members of his senior staff and watched her work. She was not moving the way a visitor moved. She was not moving the way someone demonstrating capability moved. She moved the way people moved when they stopped thinking about moving, when the pattern was so deeply embedded that the body ran it without the conscious mind getting involved. She cleared the south room in 11 seconds, 2 threat contacts, both registered as clean neutralizations. She moved to the corridor with her back to the wall, not to the center, not to the open space. The wall, where an experienced operator moved when they understood geometry. She checked the corner with a low peek before she committed. She entered the east room from the hinge side of the door. Holt, watching the monitor, said under his breath, "She's running it correctly." Nobody answered him. Everyone was watching the screen. The scenario adapted. The control system shifted 2 of the threat actors to new positions based on her movement pattern, a mid-run adjustment designed to break rhythm and force recalculation. She paused for 1 second in the second-floor corridor, 1 second. Then she shifted her approach angle to the room ahead and entered from a position that neutralized the threat actor's new sightline before it could register a hit. Moreno turned to look at Reeves. Reeves was staring at the monitor. The scenario threw its hardest complication at the 3rd floor. A civilian placed in direct proximity to a threat actor, requiring a shot that 90% of operators missed on the first attempt because the angle was wrong and the stress response pushed trigger timing. Elena approached the room, held outside for 2 seconds, the electronic system recorded the pause, and entered with a lateral move that changed the geometry of the shot entirely. Clean hit on the threat, civilian registered unharmed. The system logged the run complete at 4 minutes, 11 seconds, with a score that the control station displayed in red text, because the software hadn't needed to use that color in 4 years. She had broken the record by 38 seconds. The room at the control station was completely silent. Elena walked back through the south door and removed her helmet. Her breathing was elevated. It was a real physical effort. The course demanded that. But she was already bringing it down. The controlled recovery of someone who understood exactly what their body was doing and how to manage it. She handed the helmet to the gear attendant and looked at Reeves. He was still looking at the monitor. "Commander," she said. He turned. There was something in his face that he wasn't fully managing. Not embarrassment, not quite. Something closer to the specific discomfort of a person who had made a very public assessment and watched it be dismantled in real time in front of everyone they led. "I need to see your full credentials," he said. His voice was controlled. "Everything. Whatever you can release." She reached into the front pocket of her vest. She pulled out a small, heavy coin and set it on the control station counter between them. It was a challenge coin, the kind that special operations veterans carried, unit-specific. heavy with the kind of meaning that only the people who'd earned them understood. But the symbol on this coin wasn't a unit that anyone in that room had seen on a coin before. It was the insignia of a command element that operated so far above the normal special operations hierarchy that most people who worked in naval special warfare knew it existed only as a reference in security briefings. Moreno picked it up, looked at it, set it down slowly. "Her name," he said to Reeves, his voice very quiet, "is Commander Elena Vargas. United States Navy, retired. She ran Tier 1 operations for 11 years in 7 theaters. Her classified service record includes—" He stopped. He looked at Elena. "I recognized your name when I heard it. I didn't connect it until now." "That's all right," she said. "The Kestrel Point evaluation," Moreno said. "This isn't just a performance review, is it?" It wasn't a question. Elena looked at him and then at Reeves, and the leveling quality of her expression had shifted slightly. Not into something warmer, exactly, but into something more direct. "No," she said. There were concerns raised at the command level about leadership culture within Team 7, about how decisions get made, about who gets dismissed before they get heard. She picked up the challenge coin and pocketed it. "I was sent to evaluate the full picture. The training metrics are part of that. The rest of it—" Her eyes moved to Reeves. "The rest of it depends on what I see over the next few days." Reeves didn't move. The score was still glowing red on the monitor screen behind him. His team was around him. He had just watched a woman he'd treated as a probable tourist walk through the hardest course on his installation and come out the other side with a 4-year record erased. He had nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse. He said nothing. And in the silence, the weight of the morning, what he had done at the gate, what he had set up in the facility, what he had assumed without evidence and acted on without verification, settled around the room like something that wasn't going to be easily moved. Elena Vargas picked up her gear and handed it back to the attendant. "I'd like to see the after-action reports from the last 6 months," she said. "And I'll need a workspace." She walked toward the facility door, and the entire senior staff of Team 7 stepped back to let her pass. She walked toward the facility door, and the entire senior staff of Team 7 stepped back to let her pass. And nobody said anything about that either, because there was nothing to say. The workspace they gave her was a repurposed planning room at the end of the administrative corridor, about 12 feet by 14, with a whiteboard on one wall and a table that had seen better decades. It had been used most recently for storage. There were 3 boxes of old supply manifests stacked in the corner and a dead plant on the windowsill that nobody had moved. Elena set her bag on the table, looked at the plant once, and left it where it was. Prescott, the administrative lieutenant, appeared in the doorway with a laptop and an access token for the base's internal document server. He was 26 years old and the kind of person who processed difficult situations by being extremely helpful about logistics. "I've set up your credentials for the after-action database," he said. "You'll have read access on everything filed in the last 18 months. The last 6 months are unredacted. Anything older than that has summary overlays, but I can request full pulls if you need them. It just takes a day or 2. "Start the request now," she said. "All of it." "Yes, ma'am." He hovered in the doorway. "Can I get you anything else?" "Coffee," she said. "Black, and close the door on your way out." He did. She opened the laptop, entered the access credentials, and pulled up the after-action report archive. There were 147 reports filed in the previous 6 months. She started at the beginning of that window and read forward, not skimming, not searching for specific terms, reading the way an experienced evaluator read, which was slowly enough to catch what wasn't there as well as what was. The reports were technically competent. Team 7 logged clean scores on almost everything: marksmanship, physical performance, mission simulation times. The numbers were good. Reeves ran a tight ship in the ways that produced good numbers. But there were gaps. They were the kind of gaps that didn't show up in the performance metrics because they lived in the white space between logged entries, the after-action notes that were shorter than they should have been for the complexity of the scenario, the sections on decision-making under uncertainty that consistently used the same 3-sentence template regardless of what had actually happened in the exercise, the near-miss entries that were logged but never followed with a documented review or a change in approach. Someone was writing these reports to satisfy the filing requirement, not to actually capture what had happened. She was on the 43rd report when the door opened without a knock. Commander Reeves stepped in. He was carrying his own coffee, which told her the visit wasn't impulsive. He'd taken the time to get it, which meant he'd thought about this. He looked at the whiteboard, at the boxes in the corner, at the dead plant, and then at her. Prescott gave you the archive access, he said. He did. Reeves sat down across from her without being invited. She didn't comment on that. I want to address this morning, he said. All right. He looked at her directly. Whatever he was going to say, he'd decided to say it plainly, and she gave him credit for that even before he got the words out. I made assumptions I shouldn't have made. I acted on them. That wasn't appropriate, and it reflected poorly on my judgment. Yes, she said. It did. He absorbed that without flinching. I'm not going to pretend the gate situation didn't happen or that it doesn't affect how this evaluation goes. I'm telling you, I recognize the error. I understand. She set the laptop aside. Commander, I've been doing this for a while. I've seen the gate situation in a dozen variations at a dozen installations. What interests me isn't the moment you made the wrong call. It's whether you understand why you made it. He was quiet for a second. I classified you based on appearance and context before I had evidence. That's part of it. And I let my team see me do it. That's the other part. She folded her hands. Your team takes its cues from you. When you dismissed me at the gate, you gave them permission to do the same. That's a culture issue, not an incident issue. That's what I'm here to look at. Reeves held her gaze. His jaw was set, but his eyes were doing something more complicated. The look of a person who had built a professional identity around being right and was in the process of absorbing the cost of a specific kind of wrong. I'd like to be present for the evaluation, he said. As much of it as you'll allow. I was going to require that, she said. You should see what I see. He nodded once and stood up. At the door, he paused. The record you broke this morning, he said. The Master Chief who held it. He did 3 combat deployments before he ran that course. I know, she said. He left. She went back to the reports. By the time she'd worked through the first 100 files, it was early afternoon and the base had shifted into its training rotation. She could hear the distant, flat percussion of the live fire range through the wall, the kind of sound that faded into background noise when you'd been around it long enough but never fully disappeared. She found the first real problem on report number 88. It was filed 4 months ago, logged as a standard urban movement exercise. The performance metrics were fine. The team had completed the scenario inside the time window, no casualties registered, objectives met. But in the notes section, buried under the boilerplate summary language, there was a single line that stood out. Lieutenant K. Reinhold flagged lateral entry point compromise. Assessment not incorporated into debrief. Elena read it twice. Then she went looking for Lieutenant Reinhold. The personnel directory listed Kirsten Reinhold as a support officer attached to Team 7's planning staff. Not a line operator, not combat deployable under the current unit structure, but someone with a tactical planning background and a desk in the operations building. Elena saved the file, marked the report, and kept reading. She found 4 more references to Reinhold's assessments over the following 8 weeks. All of them had been logged in passing. None of them had been incorporated into training modifications. 2 of them had been explicitly noted as reviewed and not actioned, with no further explanation. She closed the laptop. There was a specific shape to what she was looking at, and it wasn't about one bad call at a gate. It was about a pattern of how information moved or didn't move inside this unit. Who got heard? Who got filed away? She found Reinhold in the operations building at 1340, seated at a workstation in a shared planning office with 2 other officers. Reinhold was 32, with short brown hair and the specific focused stillness of someone who spent most of their professional life thinking several steps ahead. She looked up when Elena appeared in the doorway, and her expression shifted into something that was careful before it was anything else. Lieutenant Reinhold, Elena said, I'm Elena Vargas from the Oversight Evaluation Team. Do you have a few minutes? The 2 other officers in the room glanced at each other. Reinhold stood up. Yes, ma'am, she said. There's a conference room down the hall. The conference room was empty. Reinhold sat across from Elena and put her hands flat on the table, not defensive, just still, the posture of someone who had learned to present calm regardless of what they were actually feeling. "I've been looking at the after-action reports," Elena said. "I noticed several entries where your tactical assessments were logged but not incorporated into training modifications. I wanted to ask you directly about that." Something moved behind Reinhold's eyes. A brief flash of something. Relief, maybe. Or the particular tension of someone who had been carrying a question for a long time and wasn't sure yet whether they were safe to answer it honestly. "Which reports?" Reinhold asked. Elena named the dates. Reinhold was quiet for a moment. Then, "The lateral entry compromise. I flagged that during the debrief session. I had data from the sensor overlay that showed a consistent blind spot in the team's entry approach on the east side scenarios. I put it in the notes because I was told to document concerns formally." "Who told you that?" "Commander Reeves." Elena waited. "He said if I had tactical assessments, I should put them in the formal notes so the record was accurate. But when I brought it up in the actual debrief," Reinhold stopped, recalibrated. "I was told the team's performance metrics were within acceptable range, and the assessment wasn't actionable." "By whom?" "Commander Reeves." The silence held for a moment. "Did that happen more than once?" Elena asked. Reinhold looked at her hands. "4 times in 6 months. I stopped bringing things up in debrief sessions after the 3rd time. I kept logging them in the notes because I figured, I don't know what I figured, that someone would eventually read them." "Someone did," Elena said. Reinhold looked up. "Your assessments were accurate," Elena said. "All 4 of them. 2 of the gaps you identified show up as performance weaknesses in subsequent exercises." She paused. "I want you to know that this conversation is part of the formal evaluation record." Reinhold exhaled slowly. It wasn't dramatic. It was just the sound of pressure releasing from somewhere it had been sitting for a while. "Is there anything else you want to tell me?" Elena asked. Reinhold thought about it, really thought about it, which Elena respected. Then, "There are 2 other members of the planning staff who've had the same experience. Their assessments didn't make it into the record at all." Elena wrote down 2 names. Équipe. By 1600, the word had moved through the installation in the particular way that information moved through a small military base, not through formal channels, not through announcements, but through the specific frequency of people who worked in close proximity and noticed things. The woman in the gray shirt, the CQC record, the score in red on the monitor, the way the senior staff had stepped back from the doorway. Holt was the one who brought it into the open, the way Holt always brought things into the open, because he had the particular gift of saying what everyone else was quietly thinking at the exact moment when saying it shifted something. He was in the equipment bay with Moreno and 2 junior operators running an end-of-day gear check. The afternoon had the specific atmosphere of a day when something had happened that nobody had fully processed yet. "Who is she?" Holt said. "You heard the name," Moreno said. "I heard a name. I didn't hear what the name means." Moreno secured a latch on a storage case and didn't look up. "She was Tier 1, 11 years, before she moved to Oversight." "Tier 1, Holt repeated. "That's what I said." The 2 junior operators were doing inventory and very pointedly not participating in the conversation, which meant they were listening to every word. "That course," Holt started. "Drop it, Holt." "I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying." Moreno finally looked at him. "And yes, she ran it correctly. She ran it better than correctly, and the commander had already treated her like a tourist by the time we figured that out." He picked up the next case. "So whatever you're about to say about it, save it." Holt was quiet for a moment. Then, "What does the evaluation mean for the team?" "It means what it means," Moreno said. "We do our jobs and we don't give her anything else to write down." The junior operators exchanged a glance that Moreno caught in his peripheral vision and didn't acknowledge. The truth was that Moreno had been sitting with something since the CQC facility, since he'd picked up the challenge coin and read the insignia and felt the specific weight of understanding arrive a few hours too late. He'd heard Elena Vargas's name in a briefing document 3 years ago, a single reference, A classified operation summary he'd been cleared to read for 20 minutes in a secured room at a different installation. He hadn't thought about it since. Hadn't had reason to. Now he was thinking about it. And he was thinking about the East Gate and the way Reeves had stood in front of her with his arms crossed, and the way the team had laughed, and how Moreno himself had stood there and not said anything because he hadn't known, and because he hadn't looked hard enough to know. That was the part that stayed with him. Not that Reeves had gotten it wrong, that none of them had looked hard enough. Elena found Reeves at 1715 in the operations building. He was reviewing the next day's training schedule on a wall-mounted display, and he had the look of a man doing work as a way of not thinking about the day he'd just had, which was a thing Elena had seen before and understood. "I spoke with Lieutenant Reinhold," she said. He didn't turn from the display. "I expected you would." She flagged 4 tactical gaps in the last 6 months. 2 of them showed up as training weaknesses in subsequent exercises. Now he turned. His face was controlled, but there was a tightness around his eyes that wasn't. "I reviewed her assessments," he said. "At the time, the team metrics were within acceptable performance range. I made a call." "You made the same call 4 times," Elena said, "based on the same factor." He was quiet. "She's a planning officer, not a line operator," Elena said. "That's the factor. Her assessments were coming from someone you'd already placed in a category, just like the gate this morning." She held his gaze. "The 2 aren't separate incidents, Commander. They're the same pattern." Reeves looked at her for a long moment. The ventilation system ran. Somewhere outside, a vehicle moved across the base road. "What happens now?" he said. "I keep evaluating," she said, "and tomorrow morning I want to sit in on your team debrief after the morning exercise. All of it, including the parts where people bring up concerns." He nodded. "And I want Reinhold in that debrief," Elena said. "On the floor, not in the notes." Something shifted in his jaw, but he said, "Understood." She left him with the training schedule. The next morning's exercise was a maritime infiltration simulation. Team 7, running a shipboarding scenario in the harbor facility, timed and scored. Elena watched from the observation platform above the water, making notes, not on the performance metrics, which were good, but on the communication patterns. Who spoke during the scenario? Who didn't? Who deferred to whom, and whether that deference tracked rank or something less formal. She watched Moreno run his element with the specific precision of a man who had been doing this for a long time and knew exactly how well he was doing it. She watched the 2 junior operators, Torres and a young petty officer named Dex Galloway, run the scenario with the aggressive energy of people who hadn't yet had the experience that taught you to be careful about the things you didn't see coming. She watched Reeves observe from the lower platform, and she watched him watching his team, and she tried to separate what was genuine tactical attention from what was the performance of tactical attention in front of an evaluator. She couldn't fully separate it. That was honest. The debrief happened at 09:45 in the main briefing room. Team 7 senior staff, 4 junior operators, Reinhold and 2 other planning officers, and Reeves at the front of the room. Elena sat against the wall, not at the table. Reeves ran the first 15 minutes in standard form. Scenario playback, performance metrics, timeline review. He was competent at it. The team engaged with the material and asked the right questions. Then he said, "Planning staff, any tactical observations from the morning exercise?" It was not something he had said in the previous 6 months of debrief sessions based on the after-action records. Elena knew that. Reeves knew she knew it. Reinhold looked at Elena once, fast, almost imperceptible, and then looked at Reeves. She had a tablet in front of her with her notes from the morning. She said, "The approach vector on the port side entry had a 30-second exposure window that the scenario opposition didn't exploit. In a real-world boarding with adaptive opposition, that window is a problem. I have the sensor overlay if you want to look at it." Reeves said, "Pull it up." Reinhold pulled it up. The room looked at the data. Moreno leaned forward and asked a specific question about the sensor timing. Galloway, the junior petty officer, said something about the entry angle that was actually correct and showed he'd been paying attention to something real. The conversation that followed was not dramatic. It was the straightforward, practical conversation of people looking at a real gap and thinking about how to close it. It lasted 11 minutes. Elena wrote 3 words in her notes. It can work. She was still writing when her phone, set to silent on the desk beside her, lit up with a call from a number she recognized. The Naval Special Warfare Command Oversight Office. Not Prescott's extension, the director's line. She looked at it, excused herself from the room. In the corridor, she answered. "Vargas," she said. "Elena." The director's voice was flat in the way it got when something had changed. "We've got a situation developing. I need you to know about it before you hear it from the base." She stepped further from the briefing room door. "Go ahead." "There's been an incident involving an active Team 7 operator, Petty Officer Torres, the one who ran the portside entry this morning." A pause. "He's been identified in connection with a classified information security issue. We're talking potential compromise of operational communication protocols. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service is involved." Elena was still. "The base command is going to receive formal notification in the next 2 hours, the director said. But the reason I'm calling you directly is that the evaluation you're conducting, the leadership culture assessment, is now linked to the investigation. NCIS wants to know how information moves through that unit. Who gets heard, who gets dismissed, who might have flagged something and been told to stand down." Elena looked at the closed briefing room door. "There's something else," the director said. "Tell me." "Reinhold filed a concern 6 weeks ago, not through the after-action system, through a separate internal channel that routes to oversight. She flagged an anomaly in the communication logs from a late-night exercise. The concern was received, logged, and scheduled for review." Another pause. "It was never reviewed. It sat in a queue." Elena closed her eyes for 1 second. "Someone dropped it," the director said. "We don't know yet whether that was negligence or something worse. But Elena, the gap Reinhold identified 6 weeks ago in that communication log, it matches the window that NCIS is currently investigating." The base around her was running its normal afternoon. Somewhere behind the briefing room door, Galloway was probably still asking questions about entry angles. Reeves was probably watching the sensor overlay on Reinhold's tablet and trying to figure out how to be the kind of commander who listened to the things he'd spent 6 months not listening to. And somewhere in the unit, something was broken in a way that went past culture and past leadership patterns and into something that had an NCIS case number attached to it. "I'm going to need everything Reinhold filed 6 weeks ago," Elena said, "and I need to know who received it in the oversight queue." "I'm sending it now. And Director," she kept her voice even, "don't notify base command yet. Give me 2 hours." A pause. 2 hours, the director said. "Then it goes through formal channels regardless." The call ended. Elena stood in the corridor for a moment. The ventilation ran. The range was quiet at this hour. Down the hall, the briefing room door was still closed. She looked at her phone. The files were already coming through. The concern Reinhold had filed, the communication log anomaly, the oversight queue record showing the date it was received and the date it was last accessed, which was the same date, 6 weeks ago, and had not been touched since. She read through the summary quickly. Then she read it again slowly. Reinhold had flagged a 20-minute window in a late-night communication log where the encrypted frequency showed a secondary signal pattern that shouldn't have been there. She'd described it precisely, with timestamps and technical notation, in the kind of language that made it immediately clear she knew exactly what she was looking at. The concern was detailed. It was credible. It was the kind of flag that, if someone had looked at it 6 weeks ago, might have stopped whatever had happened to Torres before it reached the point of an NCIS investigation. Elena walked back to the briefing room door and pushed it open. The room looked up. The debrief was winding down, notes being closed, the morning exercise nearly processed and filed. She looked at Reinhold. "Lieutenant," she said, "I need you to come with me." Reinhold read her face, not the words, the face, and was on her feet in 2 seconds. Reeves looked at Elena. "What's happening?" "I need 30 minutes, Elena said. "Stay in this building." She didn't wait for his answer. Down the corridor, in the planning room with the dead plant and the old supply manifests, Elena sat Reinhold down and set her phone between them with the oversight file open on the screen. 6 weeks ago, Elena said. The communication log anomaly. Walk me through exactly what you saw. Reinhold looked at the file. Something crossed her face. The particular expression of a person who had been right about something important and had spent 6 weeks being wrong to feel relieved about it. I saw it during a post-exercise log review, Reinhold said. Late night scenario, 2 in the morning. The encrypted channel showed a secondary pattern in the frequency signature. Not a malfunction, not interference. It had structure. Like someone was running a parallel transmission on a channel that was supposed to be ours only. Did you tell anyone besides filing the concern? I told Commander Reeves. The room was very quiet. When? Elena said. The morning after I filed it, Reinhold said. I went to his office. I showed him the log excerpt on my tablet. He looked at it and said, She stopped. He said it was probably a calibration artifact from the new radio systems. He said I should document it formally if I wanted to, but that he'd reviewed similar patterns before and it wasn't something to escalate. Elena looked at her. Did he look at the full log segment or just the excerpt you showed him? Reinhold was quiet for a moment. The excerpt, she said. How long was the excerpt? 4 minutes of the 20-minute window. Elena picked up her phone. Outside, across the installation, she could hear the base continuing its afternoon in complete ignorance of the shape of what was sitting in this room. The 2-hour window the director had given her was already moving. Torres was somewhere on this base. The NCIS notification was sitting in a queue at oversight, waiting for the clock to run down. And somewhere in the communication logs from a late-night exercise 6 weeks ago, there was a 20-minute window that Reinhold had found and flagged and documented and reported, and that had been seen by exactly the right people in exactly the wrong amounts. Elena set the phone down and looked at Reinhold directly. I need you to pull the full 20-minute log segment, she said, right now, whatever you have to access it on. Reinhold was already reaching for her own tablet. And Lieutenant, Elena said, I need to know. Is there anyone else on this base who might have seen that signal pattern? Anyone you mentioned it to? Anyone who might have done their own review? Reinhold pulled up the log file. Her hands were moving fast but controlled, the motion of someone running on professional training rather than whatever was happening in her chest. She stopped, looked at the screen, looked at Elena. The log file, she said. The full segment. Her voice was very level, the way voices got when something had gone wrong that the person hadn't expected. It's been accessed since I filed the concern. She turned the tablet so Elena could see the timestamp in the access record. 3 days ago, someone pulled the full 20-minute segment. Elena looked at the timestamp. Then she looked at the access credential listed below it. The credential belonged to Petty Officer First Class Brian Holt. The credential belonged to Petty Officer First Class Brian Holt. And Elena stared at it for exactly 3 seconds before her mind stopped cataloging what it meant and started moving. Does anyone else have access to your filed concern? She asked. Only through the oversight queue, Reinhold said, and through the base internal server if someone had. She stopped. You need admin-level credentials to pull a specific log file like this. Regular operator credentials wouldn't get you there. But Holt has admin access. He's on the communications rotation. He'd have read access to the frequency logs for maintenance purposes. Reinhold's voice had gone very controlled, the kind of control that happened when a person's brain was running faster than their composure. But pulling a specific segment from a file that was part of a formal concern, that's not maintenance, that's targeted. Elena was already on her feet. Lock your tablet. Don't access anything else on this file until I tell you to. And don't talk to anyone on the team about this. Not Reeves, not Moreno, nobody until I come back to you. What are you going to do? Elena was already at the door. Find out how bad this is before someone else does. She moved down the corridor fast, but not running, which was the particular discipline of someone who knew that running in a building full of trained operators changed the atmosphere in ways that couldn't be walked back. She needed 2 minutes before the building started asking questions. She found a quiet alcove near the east stairwell and called the director back. I need a hold on the NCIS notification, she said when the line connected. Not a cancellation. A hold. 30 minutes. Elena. The log file that Reinhold flagged was accessed 3 days ago by an operator with communications maintenance credentials. If NCIS comes through that front gate right now, whoever accessed that file will know the window is closing. I need to establish whether Holt acted alone before we lose the opportunity to do that quietly. A pause. 30 minutes, the director said. That is the absolute outside limit I can give you. Understood. She ended the call and stood for a moment with her back to the wall, thinking through the shape of it. Holt had accessed the file 3 days ago. The NCIS timeline on Torres had started 4 days ago, which meant Holt had gone looking at the log after the Torres situation was already in motion, which meant he knew something or suspected something or had been told to check whether the evidence was still there. None of those options were good, but they pointed in different directions and the direction mattered. She went looking for Holt. He wasn't in the equipment bay or the briefing room. She found him in the communications workshop on the second floor of the operations building, a room she hadn't been in yet, with the particular organized density of a space where technical work happened. Workbenches along both walls, equipment racks, testing hardware, the specific smell of solder and climate control. Holt was alone, running a diagnostic on a radio unit, and he looked up when she came in with the expression of a man whose day had been building towards something he wasn't sure about. "Ms. Vargas," he said. "I have a question for you," she said. She kept her voice neutral, not warm, not hard, just even. The tone she used when she wanted to watch what happened to a person's face before their mouth caught up. 3 days ago, you accessed a communication log file on the base internal server. The file covered a 20-minute frequency window from the late-night exercise 6 weeks ago. His face did something. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was more complicated than that. It was the expression of someone who had been carrying something and had just been told that the thing they were carrying was visible. "Yes," he said. "Why?" He set down the diagnostic tool, looked at his hands for a second, then back at her. "Because I saw the same pattern she saw. Reinhold. I didn't know she'd filed a concern. Nobody told me that. But I was running a routine maintenance sweep on the frequency logs from that month, and I caught the secondary signal in the window. I almost wrote it off as calibration noise, the way the commander said. But it wasn't calibration noise. I know what calibration noise looks like." He paused. "I've been looking at communication systems for 11 years. "So you pulled the full segment?" "I pulled the full segment, and then I spent 3 days trying to figure out what I was looking at and who I was supposed to tell." "Why didn't you go directly to Commander Reeves?" Something shifted in his expression. "Because the last time someone took a concern about that frequency log to Commander Reeves, it went into the formal notes system and stopped moving. I didn't know that when it happened. Reinhold didn't broadcast it. But I heard enough around the unit to understand that flagging something technical and watching it disappear was a pattern." He looked at her steadily. "And then you showed up, and I started thinking maybe there was a different channel." Elena studied him. His hands were still on the bench, relaxed, not gripping anything. His breathing was normal. The specific tells she looked for when someone was constructing a story under pressure weren't there. "You were going to come to me," she said. It wasn't a question. "I was trying to figure out how," he said. "I didn't know how much you already knew." She made a decision, not a comfortable one. The decision had edges, but it was the right one given the clock. "I need you to write down everything you observed in that log segment," she said. "Not a formal report, just a complete account, everything in sequence, with timestamps if you have them. On paper, not in the system." He nodded. He understood what she was saying, which told her something about how clearly he was reading the situation. "And Holt," she said. "When did Torres first start showing interest in the communication systems?" "Not officially. Informally. Did he ever come in here?" Holt went very still. "Twice," he said, "in the month before the late-night exercise. He said he was cross-training. I showed him the basic radio maintenance protocols. I thought..." He stopped. "I thought it was initiative." "Did you log those visits?" "No." She held his gaze for a moment. "Write down everything. All of it, including Torres. I need it in 20 minutes." She left him writing. Moreno was the next piece she needed, and she found him on the lower deck of the training facility doing a solitary equipment check that was clearly a way to be alone with his thoughts, in a space where being alone with your thoughts was socially acceptable. He looked up when she came down the stairs, and his face had the particular quality of a man who had been expecting a reckoning and had been waiting to see what shape it arrived in. "Chief?" she said. "Commander?" he said, the title coming naturally now, without the hesitation that had been there yesterday, which told her something had settled in him overnight. She sat down on the equipment crate across from him. "I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. I'll give you what I can. Torres, before any of this, before yesterday, before the evaluation, did anything about his behavior concern you?" Moreno ran a hand over his jaw. It was a real gesture. The gesture of someone actually thinking rather than managing their response. "Two things," he said. "About 3 months ago, he started coming in late on non-training mornings. Not dramatically late, 10 minutes, 15, but consistently. I noted it, I was going to address it, and then his performance metrics jumped in the same window. He was scoring higher than he ever had on the range. So I held off. I told myself the late mornings were a sleep adjustment and the performance gains were the real story. And the second thing? He stopped going to the common areas," Moreno said. "Not dramatically, not suddenly, he just gradually wasn't around. When the team got together informally, Torres would be elsewhere. I put it under introversion. Some operators get quieter as they get better. It's not unusual. But it wasn't introversion. No." Moreno looked at the floor. "I've been turning that over since yesterday. The performance gains, the withdrawal, those aren't signs of an operator hitting a stride. Those are the signs of an operator who's managing a second set of demands." He was quiet for a moment. "I should have looked harder." "Maybe," Elena said, "but you're looking now." She told him what she could tell him, the broad shape of the NCIS situation, not the specific details about the log file or Holt, because those were moving parts that she needed to keep controlled. Moreno listened without interrupting, which she appreciated. When she finished, he was very still. "What do you need from me?" he said. "In about 25 minutes, this base is going to receive a formal notification that triggers an NCIS response. When that happens, I need you to be the person who keeps this unit from fragmenting. Reeves is going to take a hit. The team is going to be off balance. Someone needs to hold the operational continuity while the formal process runs." "That's my job," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm telling you I know." He looked at her. "What about Reeves?" "Reeves is a separate part of this," she said. "How he handled Reinhold's assessments is going to be in my report, and the consequences of that are going to run through formal channels. But the leadership culture issue and the security issue are two different problems, even if they grew from the same root. I won't let one collapse into the other." Moreno nodded slowly. "That's fair." "It's accurate," she said. "Fair is what we're working toward." She left him with his equipment check and walked back upstairs. Holt's written account was on the bench when she returned to the communications workshop. 7 pages. Handwritten, dense with technical notation and timestamps. She read through it in the corridor outside, standing up, and the picture it assembled was precise enough to make her chest tighten slightly, which was a physiological response she noted and moved past. The secondary signal pattern Reinhold and Holt had both identified independently was not random interference. It had a structure, a repeating cycle of frequency shifts that could only be produced intentionally, with equipment calibrated to match the base's encrypted channel parameters, which meant someone with technical access and specific knowledge had constructed a parallel transmission window that piggybacked on the unit's secure frequency during the late-night exercise. The 20-minute window was short enough to evade automated anomaly detection. It was exactly long enough to transmit a specific data package. She didn't know what data had gone out. That was NCIS's territory. But she now had 2 independent observations from 2 operators who'd caught the same anomaly and separately reached the same technical conclusion. And she had a timeline that placed Torres in the communications workshop twice in the month preceding the exercise. She also had 6 weeks of nothing, because Reinhold's concern had sat in a queue, and Reeves had seen 4 minutes of the log and called it calibration noise. The overhead announcement system activated at 1447 with a base-wide administrative notification, dry, procedural language, the kind of phrasing that said nothing specific but indicated that something specific was in motion. The formal NCIS notification had arrived. The 30-minute hold was up. Elena was already walking toward the command building. She reached Reeves's office at the same moment his desk phone started ringing. He picked it up, listened, and watched her walk in. His face changed as the voice on the other end of the line delivered whatever it was delivering, and the change wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet collapse of a specific assumption, the look of a man who had thought the hardest part of the week was already behind him. He set the phone down. "NCIS is coming through the main gate," he said. "I know." "Torres is part of a larger situation," she said. "Commander, I need you to do exactly 3 things in the next 15 minutes. Clear your schedule for the rest of the day. Tell your staff that all base communications go through you directly until further notice. And do not talk to Torres before NCIS does." He stood up. "This is my unit, and you're still in command of it," she said. "NCIS investigates. You run the base. Those 2 things don't cancel each other out, but they do have to run parallel, not on top of each other. If you get in front of this before they're through the gate, you make your unit look like it's managing the story. You don't want that." He looked at her. His jaw was working through something. The instinct to move, to assert control, to be the person in the room who was ahead of events. She could see it in his posture, the way his hands wanted to be doing something. "Reeves," she said, "stand still." He stopped. She held his gaze. "You're a good commander in some important ways. That's in my report, too. Not as consolation, as fact. But right now, standing still is the tactical decision. Let the process run." He breathed out slowly. "Moreno?" "Already briefed," she said. "He's got the operational continuity. You trust him?" "Yes." "Then trust him now." The first NCIS vehicle came through the main gate at 15:03. Elena watched it from the command building window. A dark sedan followed by a support vehicle, moving through the installation with the particular purposeful pace of a process that had already been fully planned before it arrived. She had handled the shape of things as well as the time allowed. The Holt account was with her. The Reinhold documentation was secured. The formal evaluation record was separate from the investigation record, and she had been careful to keep them separate because she understood that the investigation would move fast, and the evaluation would need to stand on its own afterward. What she hadn't fully anticipated was Petty Officer Torres. He didn't run. That was the thing she would think about later, that he had apparently known for some time that this was coming, and he had decided not to run. When the NCIS agents made their way to the barracks and knocked on the door of his room at 1519, he opened it. He had his ID ready. He said, clearly and without hesitation, "I know why you're here." Elena wasn't in the barracks. She heard it secondhand from the NCIS lead agent, a woman named Special Agent Doris Packard, who came to find Elena in the planning room at 1540 with the specific efficient energy of someone running multiple tracks at once. "He's cooperating," Packard said. "More than cooperating, he's talking. We're going to need the full communication log from the 6-week window, and I want the independent technical assessments you secured." "You'll have them," Elena said. "I need to know one thing first." Packard raised an eyebrow. "Torres, how long has he been involved?" Packard looked at her for a moment, the look of someone assessing whether to share information across jurisdictional lines. Then, "He says 7 months. He also says he didn't know what he was transmitting. He was approached, he was compensated, and he was told it was a signals intelligence test, an authorized black program evaluation of base security." Elena went very still. "He believed it," Packard said. "He's 24 years old, and someone told him he was part of a classified program. He had no way to verify it and nobody to ask. Because when someone in his unit tried to flag the anomaly he helped create," Elena said, "they were told it was calibration noise." Packard held her gaze. "Yes." The room had a different quality now. The dead plant on the windowsill, the boxes in the corner, the whiteboard that Elena had started using that morning to map the evaluation timeline, which now had a parallel track running beside it that it hadn't had 3 hours ago. Torres had been exploited. Not recruited, not turned. Exploited by someone who had identified a young, high-performing operator who wanted to matter and had told him a story that let him matter in a way he could feel good about. The transmission had gone out. The data package, whatever it was, had gone somewhere, and the 6-week gap between Reinhold's concern and this moment had been the window that someone, somewhere, had counted on. Who approached him? Elena said. He doesn't know a name, Packard said. He has a description and a contact method. We're running it. She paused. But Elena, the contact method was a frequency channel, a specific encrypted channel that Torres was told to access through the base communications system. Elena looked at her. The channel is registered, Packard said. It's a legitimate Naval Special Warfare Administrative frequency. Low traffic used for logistics coordination. Another pause, this one heavier. The channel's administrative credentials are tied to a specific oversight office. Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not fear exactly, but the particular cold clarity that arrived when the shape of something came fully into view and was worse than she'd expected. Which office? She said. Packard looked at her steadily. The Naval Special Warfare Command Oversight Division. The Oversight Division. Elena's own chain. The office that had sent her to Kestrel Point. The office that had fielded the call about Reinhold's concern 6 weeks ago and routed it into a queue where it had sat untouched. I need a name, Elena said. The specific person who received Reinhold's concern and logged it into the queue. We're already looking at that, Packard said. How long? Hours? Maybe less? Elena's phone lit up on the desk. The director's line again. She looked at it for 1 second before answering. Director, she said. Elena. The voice was different from the morning call, tighter, stripped of its usual administrative distance. We have a problem on our end. I know, she said. You know. The frequency channel Torres used, she said. It routes through our administrative systems. A pause. You're ahead of me. Who received Reinhold's concern 6 weeks ago? Specifically, which staff member logged it into the queue? Another pause, longer this time. The kind of pause that preceded information the person on the other end had already run through several filters. We're still verifying, the director said, but the initial access log shows it was received and manually routed to low-priority queue by a senior administrative coordinator in my office. Name. Elena. Director. Name. The name came through. Elena didn't recognize it immediately. Then she did. A staff coordinator she'd crossed paths with in a briefing room 2 years ago at the command level. A person who moved through oversight processes with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew the systems well enough to know where things could slow down, where things could be made to slow down. Secure everything in your office, she said. All communications from the last 6 months. Don't move on the staff coordinator until NCIS tells you to. They're running the formal process, and you can't get in front of it. But lock down the administrative archive right now. Already in motion, the director said. Elena, is the evaluation salvageable? She looked at the whiteboard, at the 2 tracks running side by side, the leadership culture assessment and the thing it had uncovered by existing, by asking the right questions in the right room at the right time. The evaluation is running, she said. What I found here is real, and it stands on its own. The investigation doesn't change that. She ended the call. Packard had been watching her during the conversation with the polite attention of someone trained to gather information from what people didn't say as much as what they said. The oversight angle complicates your position, Packard said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. I know, Elena said. You were sent by the office that may have been used as a cover channel for the operation that targeted Torres. I know that too, which means the chain of authority that gave you access to this installation has a question mark over it, Elena said. Yes, she met Packard's eyes. But the evaluation was real. Reinhold's assessments were real. What Holt documented was real. None of that changes based on who in my oversight office was compromised. The evidence doesn't become less true because of the chain it traveled through. Packard studied her for a moment. I'll need your full account, she said. Everything from the moment you arrived at Kestrel Point. Formal statement. On record. Tonight, Elena said. I need 2 hours first. 2 hours, Packard said. After she left, Elena sat in the planning room for a moment. Not long, 30 seconds, the amount of time it took to recalibrate. Then she stood up, picked up Holt's written account, and walked down the corridor toward the command building. Reeves needed to know what was happening in his installation. Not everything. Some of it wasn't hers to share yet. But enough. He deserved to understand the shape of it. And Elena was aware, in the particular way that the last 24 hours had made her aware, that she was sitting at the intersection of two different failures. The failure inside Team 7's leadership culture, which she had been sent to find, and the failure inside her own chain, which had been using that first failure as cover. Someone had known that Kestrel Point's leadership culture would suppress Reinhold's concern. Someone had counted on it. She stopped in the corridor. That thought settled into her with the specific weight of something that hadn't been in her calculation until now. This wasn't just about Torres. This wasn't even about one compromised coordinator in an oversight office. Someone had known enough about Kestrel Point's internal dynamics to choose it, to place Torres here, to run a signal through its frequency systems during a late-night exercise when a planning officer's concern would predictably go nowhere. Someone had known that a unit where assessments got buried was the safest possible place to hide a transmission. She stood in the corridor and thought about who had that kind of knowledge, that level of institutional familiarity, that specific understanding of how information moved through naval special warfare training installations, and how it didn't. Her phone rang. Packard. We have the contact description Torres gave us, Packard said, and her voice had changed. Harder, faster, the tone of someone running on a thread that was about to snap. Elena, we ran it against the Oversight Office personnel records. The physical description matches the senior administrative coordinator, but the access log on the frequency channel runs deeper than the coordinator's level. How much deeper? The channel was originally provisioned 3 years ago, Packard said. At the level of authorization required to provision it, we're talking senior command. Senior command. Above the director. Above the coordinator. The level where the knowledge of an installation's internal culture would exist not as gossip or rumor, but as formal assessment data, the kind of data that came from evaluations, leadership reviews, performance reports, the kind of data that came from the reports Elena had been reading for the last 2 days. Packard, she said. 3 years ago. Was there another evaluation of Kestrel Point's leadership culture? A pause while Packard checked something. Yes, she said. A standard leadership assessment, filed and closed. The final report is in the Naval Special Warfare Administrative Archive. Another pause. Elena, the evaluator on that prior assessment was... Elena heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Commander Reeves was standing at the end of the corridor, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was a man Elena had not seen at Kestrel Point before. Tall, in civilian clothes, with the particular posture of someone who had spent a long time in uniform and hadn't fully left it. The kind of face that processed rooms before it engaged with people. The kind of stillness that wasn't calm. That was readiness. And he was looking at her with an expression that was not surprise. Elena, Packard said in her ear. The evaluator on the prior assessment was the senior commander from the Oversight Division. We're running the name now, but the file has been... Her voice changed. Elena, the file has been modified. The original assessment was replaced 3 days ago. 3 days ago. The same day someone had accessed Reinhold's log file with Holt's credentials. Packard, Elena said, keeping her voice level, keeping her eyes on the man standing beside Reeves at the end of the corridor. Send me the name. The text arrived on her phone as she was still looking at him. She read it. She looked up. The man at the end of the corridor. The man who had walked in through Kestrel Point's main gate sometime in the last 2 hours without triggering any notification to her, without any announcement, without any explanation of who he was or why he was here, smiled at her. It was a smile she recognized, not from a face she'd seen recently, from a name, from a briefing document, from a closed assessment file that had been sitting in an archive for 3 years until 3 days ago, when someone with senior authorization had accessed it and rewritten it and sent the original into a deletion queue. She had thought she was here to evaluate a unit's leadership culture. She had not known, until this moment, that the person who had shaped that culture, who had written the assessment that had defined how Kestrel Point's command structure would operate, who had known 3 years ago that a unit built this way would be useful later, was already inside the installation. He took one step toward her. "Commander Vargas," he said, "it's been a while." "Commander Vargas," he said, "it's been a while." His name was Rear Admiral Wesley Crane, retired technically, though the word retired had always sat awkwardly on men who had spent their careers building systems rather than leaving them. He was 63, with the kind of face that had been commanding in its 50s and had aged into something more dangerous, a face that had learned patience. He wore a dark jacket over a collared shirt, no insignia, nothing that announced what he was. He didn't need announcement. He had walked through the main gate of a restricted naval special warfare installation in civilian clothes, and nobody had stopped him, which told Elena everything she needed to know about the level at which his access had been provisioned. She kept her phone in her hand. Packard was still on the line. She could feel the faint vibration of an open connection through the case. "Admiral Crane," she said. Her voice came out level, which was a conscious effort. Reeves was standing beside him with the expression of a man who had been told something in the last 10 minutes that had rearranged his understanding of the day. He looked at Elena, then at Crane, then back at Elena, the look of someone trying to identify which version of events was real. "Commander Reeves," Elena said, "who authorized Admiral Crane's access to the installation?" Reeves's jaw tightened. He presented senior command credentials at the main gate. "The duty officer called me," Crane said pleasantly, "and I confirmed my authorization through the standard channel. It's all properly logged, Elena. I'm not here to cause problems." "Then why are you here?" "The same reason you are," he said. "I heard there was an evaluation in progress. I wanted to offer my perspective." It was the most elegant version of a threat she had heard in a long time. He wasn't reaching for anything. He was standing in a corridor inside a military installation that he had essentially built in terms of its leadership culture 3 years ago, and he was offering his perspective. She pressed the side of her phone once, deliberately. Packard would hear it, would understand it. "Commander Reeves," Elena said, not looking away from Crane, "I need you to go to the command building and wait there. Take Moreno with you." "Ms. Vargas." "Now, please." Something in her voice moved him. He looked at Crane once, the look of a man deciding which authority in the corridor was the one he trusted, and then he walked toward the stairwell. His footsteps moved away down the hall. She was alone with Crane. "You modified the prior assessment file," she said. 3 days ago. "I updated it," he said. "There were inaccuracies in the original." The original assessment is what shaped this unit's leadership culture for 3 years. The inaccuracies you corrected were the parts of the record that connected your evaluation methodology to what Kestrel Point became. He tilted his head slightly, a gesture that wasn't agreement or denial, just acknowledgement that she had said words in a sequence. "You've been thorough," he said. "You always were. That's why I recommended you for the oversight evaluation role years ago. You have an exceptional eye for institutional patterns. You recommended me." "Your career has several of my fingerprints on it," he said. "I don't say that as a threat. I say it because you should understand that I know how you think. I know what you look for and how you see it, which means I also know that what you have right now is a series of connected observations that will take months to formalize into a provable case if you can formalize it at all. NCIS has Torres. Torres has a description and a contact method," Crane said, "neither of which points to me directly. The frequency channel was provisioned through proper administrative processes by a staff coordinator who made decisions within her authorized scope. The assessment file modification was a senior administrative action logged under a valid credential." He paused. "I have spent 30 years understanding how these systems work, Elena. I know where the seams are." She looked at him. The corridor was quiet around them, the base running its afternoon on the other side of the walls, entirely unaware. "Why Kestrel Point?" she said. Something shifted in his face. Barely. But she caught it because she was looking for it. Why choose an installation where leadership culture would suppress the anomaly flag, she said. You knew Reinhold would catch the signal. You knew someone technically capable would notice it. So you built the environment 3 years ago where what they noticed would go nowhere. That wasn't opportunistic. She kept her voice even. That was architecture. He didn't answer for a moment. In the silence, she understood that she had said something true, and that he knew she knew it was true, and that he was deciding whether the truth in this corridor mattered. The evaluation was always going to happen eventually, he said. Someone was always going to look at Kestrel Point's after-action patterns and notice the gaps. The timeline I had depended on 6 months of operational use before that review cycle. I had 5 months. A pause. You arrived a month early. The concern about leadership culture came from a planning officer's internal complaint, Elena said, filed through a channel you didn't control. A small oversight, he said, in a long plan. The data package Torres transmitted, she said. What was it? He smiled. Not warmly. The smile of someone who had decided this was the boundary of the conversation. That question, he said, is above your clearance level. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Admiral Crane, you are currently inside a restricted installation during an active NCIS investigation. You have accessed and modified a federal document archive without authorization under the investigation's parameters, because the investigation was opened 4 days ago and your file modification was 3 days ago, which means you knew the investigation was coming before it was formally initiated. That is not a seam. That is a charge. His smile stayed. You'll need to prove intent. NCIS will prove intent, she said. My job isn't to prove it. My job was to find the pattern. I found it. The rest of this isn't mine to carry. She raised her phone to her ear. Packard, she said. Did you get all of that? Every word, Packard said. We're coming to you now. Yeah. The NCIS team came through the corridor door 40 seconds later. Packard and 2 agents, moving with the particular efficient purposefulness of people who had been listening to a conversation and had the paperwork ready. Crane looked at them without visible alarm, which was either extraordinary discipline or genuine belief that this wasn't going to hold. Elena stepped back and let the process run. She watched them present the detention notice to Crane. Not an arrest, not yet, but a formal custodial hold pending investigation, which required him to remain on the installation and surrender his communication devices. He complied. Smoothly, without argument, with the professional composure of a man who had done difficult things in front of people for a long time and knew how to perform composure even when things were going wrong. But his eyes moved to Elena once while Packard was reading the hold notice, and what she saw in them wasn't anger. It was something more unsettling, a calculation that was still running, a man still looking for the seam. She went to find Reeves. He was in the command building with Moreno, exactly where she'd told him to be, and the room had the specific atmosphere of 2 people who had been sitting with difficult information and hadn't yet found a way to put it down. Reeves was standing at the window. Moreno was seated at the table, hands flat in front of him, looking at the surface. Crane is in NCIS custody, Elena said, pending formal investigation. Reeves turned from the window. His face was doing something complicated, the specific expression of someone who had been given a partial picture over the last several hours, and was now seeing it complete and finding that the completed picture was harder to look at than the partial one had been. He wrote the prior assessment, Reeves said, 3 years ago. Yes. He shaped how this command structure was built, how leadership processes were set up, what the culture expected. He paused. He built the environment where Reinhold's flag would go nowhere. And then he used Torres to run a signal through it, Elena said, knowing the flag would be buried. Reeves absorbed this. His jaw worked. He turned back to the window, then turned away from it again because there was nothing useful to look at out there, and he knew it. I buried the flag, he said. Yes. Not because Crane told me to, because that's the kind of commander I became in the environment he built. It was a hard thing to say, Harder than Elena had expected from him, which meant she'd underestimated something in him. Not his intelligence, but his willingness to follow a thought to its full consequence when it landed on him personally. "That's accurate," she said. "And it's in my report." He nodded. "What happens now for the unit?" "The NCIS investigation runs. Your leadership record, Reinhold's documentation, the after-action gaps. All of it goes into the formal evaluation report, which I will write and submit through a clean chain because the Oversight Division is currently compromised, and I will not route this through a compromised chain. And for me specifically," she held his gaze, "that's not mine to determine. What's mine to determine is the accuracy of the record. I'm going to write it accurately." He nodded again. Slower this time, the nod of someone accepting something rather than processing it. "The fact that you tell me that directly," he said, "rather than just write it." "You deserve to know what's coming," she said, "not as a courtesy, as a basic professional standard." Moreno, at the table, said quietly, "Reinhold." Both of them looked at him. "She filed that concern 6 weeks ago," he said. "She told Reeves. She documented it correctly. She did everything right." He looked at Elena. "What happens for her?" "Her assessments are in the formal record," Elena said. "All of them. The NCIS case is going to hinge partly on the credibility of the anomaly flag she filed, which means her technical work gets validated at an investigative level." She paused. "I'll make sure the evaluation report reflects what she did and when she did it." Moreno exhaled. It was a small sound, but it carried weight. The next 4 hours ran on institutional momentum, the kind of process that, once initiated, didn't require direction so much as it required people to stay out of its way. NCIS worked through the installation with the methodical attention of an organization that had been preparing for exactly this, collecting devices, securing communication logs, running formal interviews with Torres, and then with Holt, and then with 3 other members of Team 7 whose names had come up in the expanding timeline. Elena spent those hours in the planning room, writing. Not the formal evaluation report. That would take days and required a review chain she was going to have to rebuild from scratch, given the Oversight Division situation. She was writing her own account, detailed, chronological, with specific observations tied to specific evidence. She had been trained to document in the field, in conditions worse than this, and the discipline of it helped. The act of putting things in sequence forced her to see the shape of what had happened more clearly than she could see it in the middle of living it. She had arrived at Kestrel Point to evaluate a unit's leadership culture, and found the leadership culture being used as infrastructure for something that went significantly beyond training assessment gaps. The pattern Reinhold had identified, the signal Torres had unknowingly transmitted, the 3-year architecture Crane had built. They weren't separate problems. They were one problem, and the one problem had a name and a face and was currently sitting in a secured conference room at the far end of the installation, still calculating. She was on page 12 when Packard knocked and came in. "We have a preliminary identification on the data package," Packard said. She sat down across from Elena without being asked, which Elena had stopped noticing because Packard had been coming in and out of this room for 3 hours, and the formality had worn away. Torres transmitted operational scheduling data from Team 7's deployment planning system, specifically rotation schedules and mission parameters for the next cycle. Elena set down her pen. Pre-deployment data. 4 weeks out from a scheduled operational cycle. The data package included personnel assignments, insertion timing windows, and communication protocols. Packard's voice was controlled, but the control was doing work. It's the kind of data that, if it reached the wrong recipient, would compromise an active operation before it launched. Did it reach the wrong recipient? We're running the trace now. The signal went out through the parallel channel and hit a relay point we've identified in the frequency architecture. From the relay, we're tracking forward. She paused. Torres says he sent 1 transmission. The signal logs show 2 relay hops before the trace goes cold in a commercial frequency band. Crane set up the relay architecture, Elena said. That's our working assumption. The relay points were provisioned through the same administrative channel as the base frequency. Same credential chain, same authorization tier. Elena thought about what Crane had said in the corridor. I know where the seams are. He did. He had spent 30 years understanding the seams, and he had provisioned a signal architecture through legitimate administrative channels that would require months to fully map. He had counted on that. He was still counting on it. The data, Elena said. The operational deployment data. Can the mission cycle be modified? The command is working on it, Packard said. Timing window, personnel rotation, insertion parameters. All of it is being reviewed for adjustment. It adds complexity. It delays things. She met Elena's eyes. It doesn't cancel them. But it means the data he sent was actionable, Elena said. Even if we get ahead of it, someone used it. Someone has it. Yes. The weight of that settled in the room. Torres, 24 years old, who had wanted to matter and had been told he was part of something authorized, who had opened a door he didn't know he was opening. He needs a lawyer, Elena said. He has one, Packard said. We made sure of that before the formal interview. Good. That was good. Elena held that for a moment, then let it go because there was nothing she could do in that direction and several things she still needed to do in other directions. Crane's devices, she said. What did you find? Packard's expression shifted slightly. That's what I came to tell you. The devices are clean, professionally clean. Not deleted, not wiped. Clean. No communication records, no document access history, no frequency log data. She paused. He came here with a clean device knowing we'd take it, which means he transmitted everything he needed to transmit before he walked through the gate. Or he has a secondary device we haven't located. Elena stood up. The installation, she said. Has it been fully locked down? All communication systems? Packard looked at her. Base-wide communication restriction was initiated at 15:03 with the formal NCIS notification. All outbound traffic is being logged and held for review. What about the administrative frequency channel? Elena said. The one Crane provisioned. Is it specifically locked down or just captured under the general restriction? Packard was very still. Because a general restriction logs and holds, Elena said. But if someone with the provisioning credentials for that specific channel sent a signal out on it in the window between Crane arriving at the gate and the base lockdown initiating, that signal would be out before the restriction caught it. Packard stood up and had her phone to her ear before Elena finished the sentence. Elena listened to half of a very fast technical conversation, watching Packard's face for the answer before the words arrived. She got it from the expression first. There was a transmission on the administrative channel, Packard said, phone still at her ear. 31 seconds in duration, logged under the provisional restriction but not held. It was already out before the system flagged it for review. She lowered the phone. It went out at 15:01, 2 minutes before the lockdown initiated. 15:01. Crane had been inside the installation since at least 1450. He had come through the gate, located a terminal, or used a device they hadn't found, and transmitted something on the administrative channel in the 11 minutes before the lockdown, probably while Reeves was walking him to Elena, probably while Elena was still on the phone with the director. What did it contain? Elena said. We're pulling the signal record now. Packard's phone lit up. She looked at the screen. Her face went very still in the particular way that faces went still when the information was worse than the anticipated range. She showed Elena the screen. The transmission at 15:01 had contained a single data file. The file had a Naval Special Warfare Administrative header. The content, extracted from the signal record, was a personnel document, specifically, the complete service record of one individual, pulled from the classified archive with full operational history and current assignment. Elena looked at the name on the document. It was hers, her full classified service record. 11 years of Tier 1 operations, theater assignments, mission parameters that were still active classified. Every detail of every context in which she had operated, who she had worked with, what she had done, and where she had done it. Sent out through an administrative channel on a base in lockdown, 2 minutes before the restriction caught it, to a relay point that was already going cold. She looked at the screen for a long moment. Crane had walked into this installation knowing he was going to be detained. He had walked in anyway because he had one thing left to do, and the detention was the price he was willing to pay to do it. He hadn't come to Kestrel Point to manage the investigation. He had come to send that file. "Packard," she said. Her voice was steady. "I need you to do something for me." "Name it." "I need you to go to the secured conference room where Crane is being held," she said. "And I need you to ask him, so that's on formal record, with the interview running, why he came here today. Not what he told Reeves at the gate. Not the explanation he offered me in the corridor. Ask him directly. Why today? Why in person? Why Kestrel Point? Because you want his answer on record before he lawyers up." "Because I want to know what he thinks he accomplished," Elena said. "And I want it on record before he decides he doesn't have to tell anyone anything." Packard moved. Elena stayed in the planning room looking at the whiteboard. The two tracks she'd drawn that morning, the evaluation timeline and the investigation timeline, had converged into a single line now, and that line ended in a place she hadn't planned to be when she'd walked through Kestrel Point's East Gate 2 days ago in a gray shirt with no insignia. Her service record was out. Somewhere, someone who had received the operational scheduling data from Torres's transmission had now received the full classified history of the person currently dismantling the architecture they'd built. Crane had told them who she was and what she'd done and where she'd done it, because knowing that was worth something to whoever was on the other end of the relay. She understood it clearly. She didn't like it. She picked up her pen and went back to page 12, because the documentation was still the job and the job was still running, and the only thing she could control right now was how accurately she recorded what had happened in this room. She was on page 15 when Packard came back. "He answered," Packard said. Elena looked up. "I asked him why he came in person today," Packard said. "He said," she checked her notes, "he said, because some things need to be seen to properly close. And I wanted to see her face when she understood that the evaluation was always part of the operation." Elena held that for a moment. The evaluation was always part of the operation. She had been sent to Kestrel Point by an oversight office with a compromised coordinator. She had been sent on a timeline that was slightly earlier than the standard review cycle, early enough to arrive before the mission data from Torres's transmission had been formally acted on, but late enough that the transmission itself had already gone out. She had been sent here, not randomly, not through the legitimate sequence of a leadership culture concern triggering an evaluation response. Someone in the oversight chain, the coordinator, Crane, whoever else was in the architecture she hadn't fully mapped yet, had put her name on the evaluation order, had chosen her specifically, had sent the evaluator whose classified service record was the most valuable thing on Kestrel Point into a unit that was already a closed loop. She was the second package they'd been planning to transmit. Torres had sent the operational data. The evaluation order had positioned Elena to be on the installation when Crane arrived to send the second transmission. The person who had built the architecture had come in person not to escape it. He had come to finish it. And the door he had opened on the administrative channel 2 minutes before the lockdown, the one that had carried her record out to a cold relay in a commercial frequency band, was already closed, and whatever was on the other side of it already had what it had been sent for. She set down the pen. Her hands were steady. That was something. She looked at the whiteboard, at the dead plant, at the supply manifest boxes in the corner that nobody had moved in 2 days. She picked up her phone and called the director. The line rang 4 times. It went to voicemail. She called the secondary number, the encrypted line, the one that was supposed to be always staffed. It rang twice. A voice she didn't recognize answered. "This is Commander Elena Vargas," she said. "I need to speak with Director Calloway." A pause that was 1 second too long. "Director Calloway," the voice said, "is currently unavailable." "Since when?" Another pause. "Since approximately 15:10 this afternoon." 15:10. 9 minutes after Crane's transmission had gone out. "What does unavailable mean?" Elena said, and her voice was very controlled now, running on the specific discipline that 11 years of operating in environments where information arrived badly had built into her. "Director Calloway was placed on administrative hold pending an internal review," the voice said. "I'm sorry, Commander. I'm not authorized to say more than that." The line was still open. She could hear the background noise of an office running a process that had been prepared for in advance, the specific sound of an organization responding to something that had already been set in motion before the response was needed. Crane had sent her record out. The director had been pulled from her position. And somewhere in the command chain above both of them, something was moving that had been planned around the assumption that Elena Vargas would be standing exactly where she was standing right now, with her documentation on page 15 and her phone in her hand and the full shape of it finally visible. She lowered the phone. Through the planning room window, she could see the base running its evening, lights on in the operations building, the NCIS vehicle still parked at the command building entrance. A junior petty officer crossing the road between the barracks and the equipment bay, not looking up. She had found the pattern. She had documented it. She had handed the pieces to the right people in the right order, and she had done it cleanly, and none of that changed what she was looking at now. She was inside an installation whose communication systems had been used as a weapon, whose leadership culture had been architected as cover, whose evaluation, her evaluation, had been written into an operation she hadn't known she was part of. And the man who had designed all of it was 40 meters away in a secured conference room, on formal hold, with no communication devices, smiling. She lowered the phone and stood with it in her hand for a moment, looking at nothing in particular, letting the full shape of it settle. Then she picked up her pen and went back to page 15. This was the discipline that nobody talked about. Not in briefings, not in after-action reviews, not in the quiet conversations that happened between experienced operators who had spent time in environments where the ground kept moving. The discipline wasn't the ability to act under pressure. Most people could act under pressure. Adrenaline handled that. The real discipline was the ability to keep doing the work when you understood clearly that the work might not be enough. When the architecture was bigger than what you could see, when the person who'd built it was sitting 40 meters away behind a locked door, still calculating, and the director who'd sent you here was on administrative hold, and your classified service record was traveling through a commercial frequency relay to an unknown destination. You kept writing. Because the documentation was still the job. Because accuracy was the only thing she controlled right now, and she was not going to let go of the thing she controlled. She finished page 15, started page 16. At 1842, Packard came back. "The relay trace is moving," she said. "We've got a partner agency running the frequency chain, NSA technical support. They came in an hour ago. The relay point hops are mapped through 4 nodes. The signal is heading somewhere with structure." Not a dead drop, not a one-time receiver. Someone built a receiving architecture for this data. Crane's network, Elena said. Has to be. 30 years of building systems. He didn't stop at naval special warfare. Packard sat down. She had the look of someone who had been running for hours and had located a specific kind of stillness on the other side of exhaustion. The NSA team thinks they can trace the final destination within 6 hours, maybe less. What about Director Calloway? Still on administrative hold, the internal review was initiated by a deputy director, someone in the chain above her. Packard paused. We're looking at who initiated it and on what basis. It looks like it was triggered by an anonymous complaint filed through the Oversight Internal System at 1508. 7 minutes after Crane's transmission. The complaint was pre-written, Elena said, filed automatically when the transmission went out, or filed by someone watching for the transmission to confirm it had cleared the relay. That's our read, Packard said. We're treating the administrative hold on Calloway as potentially coordinated rather than legitimate, but reversing it requires going above the deputy director who initiated it, and that means going to Naval Special Warfare Command itself, Elena said. Yes. Which is the chain I haven't been able to reach since 1510. Yes. They sat with that for a moment. Outside, the base had gone quiet in the particular way military installations went quiet after dark. Not empty, just reduced to its essential functions. The lights in the NCIS vehicle at the command building entrance were still on. What do you need from me? Packard said. Elena thought about it. Not long, she'd been thinking about it for the last hour while she was writing. I need 2 things. First, I need the formal NCIS case to be documented in a way that includes the evaluation findings as supporting material, not parallel tracks, integrated. The leadership culture assessment is evidence in the security investigation because Crane built the culture specifically to serve the operation. That connection needs to be explicit in the case record. Done, Packard said. What's the second thing? I need to talk to Crane again. Packard looked at her. He's lawyered up, formally, as of 40 minutes ago. I know. I'm not going to ask him questions. I'm going to make a statement in front of him, on record, with the interview running. I want him to hear what I know while I still have the access to do it. She held Packard's gaze. And I want to see his face. Packard considered this for 3 seconds. His lawyer will object. Lawyers can object, Elena said. The interview is your process. You control the room. Another 3 seconds. 10 minutes, Packard said. I'll give you 10 minutes. Ooh. The secured conference room was a converted planning space at the far end of the administrative corridor. Smaller than the one Elena had been using, with fluorescent lighting that had a slight flicker in the corner fixture and a folding table that had seen decades of use. Crane was seated at the far end with a glass of water and a legal pad and a man in a gray suit who was his attorney and who looked at Elena when she came in with the expression of someone who had already decided this was going to be a problem. My client, the attorney said, is not. I'm not here to question your client, Elena said. She sat down across from Crane. Packard stood near the door. The recording system was running. The small indicator light in the corner of the room was steady green. I'm here to make a statement for the record. Your client is welcome to listen. The attorney looked at Crane. Crane made a small gesture. Go ahead. With the easy authority of a man who had not yet adjusted his assessment of the situation. Elena set her documentation on the table. All 16 pages, handwritten. For the record, she said, my name is Commander Elena Vargas, United States Navy, retired. I am currently serving as a Senior Evaluation Advisor for the Naval Special Warfare Command Oversight Division. Over the past 48 hours at Naval Special Warfare Installation Kestrel Point, I have documented the following. She looked at Crane directly and began reading. She read all 16 pages. It took 22 minutes. The attorney objected twice. Packard overruled both objections on the basis that the statement was being entered as evaluation testimony rather than interrogation material, which was technically accurate and practically bulletproof. Crane sat through all 22 minutes with his hands on the table and his expression controlled, and Elena watched him the way she watched everything. Steadily, without heat, looking for the thing beneath the surface. She found it at page 11. She was reading the section on the administrative frequency channel, the provisioning timeline, the relay architecture, the transmission content, and she saw something move behind his eyes. Not fear, something older than fear. Something that arrived when a person understood that the containment they'd been counting on was not going to hold. She kept reading. When she finished, she set the pages down and looked at him. You built a system that depended on people being dismissed, she said. People being told their assessments were calibration noise. People being filed away in low-priority queues. You built it because you understood, 30 years of experience, you understood it very well, that institutions protect their blind spots. That the thing nobody looks at is the safest place to hide. She paused. You were right about that. You were right about almost everything you calculated. He held her gaze. What you got wrong, she said, was the assumption that the blind spot would hold, that Reinhold would file her concern and it would stay buried, that Holt would see the signal and let it go, that when an evaluator arrived to look at the leadership culture, she'd write a report about management practices and leave. She looked at him evenly. You built the architecture very well, Admiral. You just built it around people, and people are not as predictable as frequency channels. The attorney said, Commander Vargas, I'm done, Elena said. She picked up her pages and stood. Thank you for the room, Packard. She walked to the door. Behind her, Crane said, The record goes somewhere, Elena. You know that. Whatever you document here goes into a system that has more of my architecture in it than you've found yet. She stopped, didn't turn around. Maybe, she said. But the thing about documentation is that it's patient, it waits. And the older it gets, the harder it becomes to make disappear. She opened the door. You should have thought about that before you built a system that depended on making things disappear. She walked out. The NSA technical team traced the final relay destination at 02:14 the following morning. Elena was still in the planning room. She had slept for 2 hours on the cot that Prescott had quietly arranged in the corner, and woken up at midnight to finish the formal evaluation report, which was now 23 pages and complete. The notification came through Packard, who knocked on the planning room door and said simply, "We have it." The receiving architecture was a commercial server cluster registered to a logistics company in a mid-Atlantic state that didn't exist. The registration was a layered shell, but the NSA team had gone through the shells with the patient efficiency of people who did this specifically and found, at the center, a network of communication nodes that had been operational for 7 years. The nodes had received data from 14 different sources over that period. Kestrel Point was the most recent. The operational deployment data from Taurus's transmission had been received and accessed within 4 hours of the original signal. By 0300, 3 federal agencies were involved. By 0600, the logistics company's server cluster had been physically seized. By 0800, the first arrests outside naval special warfare were being processed through a federal court in Virginia. Not Crane specifically, not yet, because building the case to Crane's level required the full chain of evidence and the full chain took time, but the people who had been on the other end of the relay were no longer receiving signals from anyone. Elena watched the morning come in through the planning room window. The base was awake early. It was always awake early. And the particular quality of the light over the harbor at 0630 had the flat, clean quality of Atlantic mornings before the humidity built. She had her coffee. The dead plant on the windowsill had not improved overnight. Reeves knocked at 700. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, which was accurate, and who had spent the hours he wasn't sleeping doing something more productive than lying in the dark, which she suspected was also accurate. He was carrying his own coffee, same as the first time he'd come to this room. But the posture was different. The easy authority was still there. It was structural. It was his. But it sat differently now, lighter in some ways, heavier in others. "The formal notification came through this morning," he said. "From NavSpec Warcom directly. The administrative hold on Director Calloway has been reversed. The deputy director who initiated it is under review." "I heard," Elena said. He sat down. "Calloway called me directly 20 minutes ago." He paused. "She said you built the chain of evidence that made it possible to reverse the hold. That the documentation you produced overnight was what the command needed to act on the deputy director situation." "The documentation was accurate," Elena said. "That's what made it useful." He looked at her for a moment. "I've been thinking about what you said in this room 2 days ago. About the pattern. About how I dismissed Reinhold the same way I dismissed you at the gate. Not consciously, not maliciously, but systematically." "Yes." "I've been trying to figure out," he said, "how much of that was Crane's architecture and how much of it was me." It was an honest question, and it deserved an honest answer. "Both," she said. "The architecture created conditions that made your patterns easier to maintain, but you maintained them. You're the one who saw 4 minutes of Reinhold's log and decided that was enough. You're the one who stood at that gate and made the call you made." She set down her coffee. "Crane gave you a system that rewarded those decisions. He didn't make the decisions for you." Reeves absorbed this without flinching. "Is there a version of this where I keep my command?" "That's above my level," she said. "What I can tell you is that your cooperation with the NCIS investigation, your willingness to have this conversation, and the actions you took once you understood the situation, those are in the record too. The record is complete. What the command does with it is their process." He nodded slowly. "And Reinhold?" "Reinhold is being formally commended," Elena said. "Director Calloway is handling it personally. Her technical assessments are part of the federal case record. She's going to be very hard to overlook going forward." A pause. "That tends to happen when you're right 6 weeks before anyone else catches up." Something in Reeves's face shifted. Not quite relief. Not guilt exactly. The specific expression of a person who had failed someone and was watching that person be recognized despite the failure, and was trying to hold both things at once without letting either of them collapse into something simpler. "I should have listened to her," he said. "Yes," Elena said. "But you're listening now. That matters less than earlier would have, but it matters more than never." He finished his coffee, stood up. At the door he paused. The same position he'd been in 2 days ago, when he'd mentioned the Master Chief's record, when he'd been trying to find a way to address something he didn't have the language for yet. "The woman who walked through my gate 2 days ago," he said. "I spent 40 minutes treating her like she didn't belong here." "You did." She broke a 4-year record and spent the next 2 days dismantling a 30-year operation. He looked at her directly. I want you to know that I understand the full distance between those two things. Good, she said. He left. The formal hearing on Wesley Crane opened 3 weeks later in a federal courtroom in Arlington, Virginia, and Elena testified for 4 hours on the first day. She did not perform certainty she didn't have. She did not simplify things that were genuinely complex. She described what she had observed, what she had documented, and what the documentation showed, in sequence, in the specific language of someone who understood both the tactical and administrative dimensions of what had happened and was not going to let either of them be collapsed for convenience. Crane's legal team spent 90 minutes trying to establish that her evaluation had been improperly authorized given the compromised oversight chain. Elena acknowledged the chain had been compromised. She explained clearly and without defensiveness that the evaluation itself had been conducted independently of the compromised elements, that her observations were her own, that her documentation had been maintained outside the base communication systems from the moment she identified the security concern, and that the evidence she had compiled had been verified by 3 independent federal agencies. The legal team moved on. The case took 7 months to fully build. It took another 4 to bring to trial. Elena was not present for all of it. She had other work, other evaluations, a new oversight chain that was being rebuilt from scratch by people who had learned something very specific and very expensive about what happened when institutional architecture was trusted more than the people inside it. Wesley Crane was convicted on 11 counts, including unauthorized disclosure of classified information, conspiracy to commit espionage, federal document fraud, and abuse of official position. He was sentenced to 23 years. He did not speak at sentencing. He sat at the defense table with the same controlled expression he'd worn in the corridor at Kestrel Point, and Elena, watching from the gallery, recognized it for what it was. Not composure, but the thing that composure looked like when there was nothing left underneath it. His network, the 14-source receiving architecture, the relay nodes, the Shell Logistics Company, was dismantled over the following 8 months. 11 other individuals were charged in connection with the operation at varying levels of involvement. 3 of them cooperated fully. 2 of them didn't and received sentences that reflected the choice. The deputy director who had placed Director Calloway on administrative hold resigned before charges were filed and entered into a cooperation agreement. He had been in Crane's network for 4 years. He had known what the evaluation order on Kestrel Point was designed to do. He had signed Elena's deployment orders. She found that out on a Tuesday afternoon in a federal building, reading case updates on a tablet in a waiting room, and she sat with it for a moment. The specific weight of knowing that the order that had sent her to Kestrel Point had been signed by someone who understood what it was sending her into. Then she set the tablet down and went into her next meeting, because the alternative was to let that knowledge take up more space than it had earned. Commander Reeves was relieved of command at Kestrel Point 6 weeks after the NCIS investigation concluded. The formal findings cited deficiencies in leadership judgment and failure to act on documented tactical concerns, specifically Reinholdt's 4 flagged assessments. He did not contest it. He completed a mandatory leadership review program and was subsequently assigned to a training coordination role at a different installation, which was not a battlefield command but was not the end of a career either. It was a reckoning with measured consequences, which was what the system produced when it was working as intended and not as architecture for something else. He called Elena once, 6 months after the assignment. The call was brief. He said he was learning things he should have known earlier, and that the operators he was working with were better for having an instructor who understood what it cost to get certain decisions wrong. He didn't ask for her opinion on his situation. He didn't seem to need it. She respected that. Lieutenant Kirsten Reinholdt was promoted. The promotion came with a formal commendation that specifically cited her independent technical assessment and her persistence in flagging a concern through available channels when primary channels failed. She was assigned to a signals intelligence advisory role that put her assessments directly into operational planning, with the specific authority to escalate concerns outside the unit chain when the situation required it. Elena heard about the promotion from Packard, who sent a 2-line text that said, Reinhold got the promotion. Thought you'd want to know. She wrote back, good. That was sufficient. Holt kept his post. His written account had been formally recognized as a critical contribution to the investigation's timeline, and there was a note in his service record that reflected it. He had come to the planning room the morning after the NCIS operation concluded, while Elena was finishing the formal report, and stood in the doorway for a moment without speaking. She'd looked up. Something on your mind, Holt? I almost didn't write it down, he said. The account you asked for. I had it in my head for 3 days, and I almost decided it wasn't my call to make. But you wrote it. You made it feel like it was worth writing. He was quiet for a moment. I've been here 8 years. I've been in a lot of rooms where it wasn't worth saying the thing I was thinking. He looked at her steadily. You changed the math on that. She thought about that for a moment. The math was always right, she said. The room was wrong. He nodded and left. She wrote that down too, at the bottom of page 23. Not because it was evidence, because it was true. Elena submitted the completed evaluation report on a Thursday morning through the rebuilt oversight chain, and by Friday afternoon it had been formally received and acknowledged at the Naval Special Warfare Command level. The report was 23 pages of evaluation findings and 31 pages of supplemental documentation. It covered Kestrel Point's leadership culture, the specific mechanisms by which Crane's 3-year architecture had shaped the unit's decision-making patterns, the performance gaps that had resulted, and the recommended corrective actions, not as punishment, but as process. How to rebuild. How to make the room worth saying the thing in. The command response came back in 2 weeks, which was fast by institutional standards. It accepted the evaluation findings, initiated the recommended corrective actions, and included a formal acknowledgement of Elena's role in the investigation. Specific, detailed language, not boilerplate, the kind of language that someone had taken time to write because they wanted the record to be accurate. She read it once and filed it. The base she went to next was in the Pacific Northwest, and it was raining when she drove through the gate. And the duty officer who checked her credentials was thorough and professional and took the time to verify her clearance chain before waving her through. She appreciated that. She told him so. He looked slightly surprised. People didn't usually stop to say that. And then he nodded with the specific dignity of someone who had just been told that the thing they were doing well was being noticed. She drove through the gate and parked and sat in the car for a moment, looking at the installation. Another base, another unit, another room full of people who had developed patterns over time, some of which served them and some of which didn't, some of which were protecting them and some of which were making them vulnerable in ways they couldn't see because the vulnerability lived in the structure of how they saw each other. She'd been doing this for 3 years in the oversight role, and before that for 11 years in places she couldn't name in public, and before that in training environments that had broken people who were genuinely capable of extraordinary things because the environments were designed by people who had confused hardness with wisdom. She was not someone who believed that the system always worked. She had spent enough time inside enough systems to understand that they were made of people, and people carried their assumptions with them. And assumptions had a way of becoming architecture when nobody looked at them long enough to ask whether they were load-bearing. But she also understood, and this was the thing that had kept her in the work, through Kestrel Point and through everything before it, that the system was not the ceiling. That the thing you documented accurately outlasted the person who wanted it buried. That the flag you filed in the right place at the right time was still there 6 weeks later when someone came looking for it, even when the someone who came looking hadn't known they were going to need it. Reinhold had not known her concern would matter that much. She had filed it because it was accurate, and because she had one channel left that she trusted. That was all. That was everything. Torres had not known what he was carrying. He was 24, and someone had told him a story that let him feel significant, and he had believed it because he'd wanted to matter, and mattering was being offered at a price he didn't know he was paying. His cooperation had helped close the case. His record would carry the mark of what he'd done. Both of those things were true simultaneously, which was how things worked when they were being looked at honestly rather than sorted into clean categories. Holt had almost not written it down. The account that had anchored the timeline of the investigation, that had given NCIS the technical framework to understand what the signal represented. He had held it in his head for 3 days, turning it over, deciding whether it was his call to make. And then he had made the call. That was the thing about the people who changed things. They were not the ones who were certain. They were the ones who were almost not going to act and then did it anyway, because the alternative was to be the kind of person who knew and said nothing, and they couldn't find a way to be comfortable with that. Elena got out of the car. The rain was coming down steadily, the Pacific Northwest variety that didn't announce itself but simply existed, consistent and unhurried. She put up her collar and picked up her bag and walked toward the gate building. She was wearing the gray shirt. She always wore the gray shirt. Not as a statement, not as a test, just because it was practical, and she'd long since stopped needing her appearance to do anything except keep her warm and mobile. She carried no insignia. She had a government ID in her jacket pocket and a classified service record that was currently traveling through a rebuilt secure archive under new protocols developed specifically in response to what had happened at Kestrel Point, and she had 16 years of knowing what she was doing and how to do it and why it mattered. The gate officer looked at her. "Name and purpose of visit," he said. "Vargas," she said. "Elena, I'm here for an evaluation." He looked at her ID, looked at her. Did his job, which was to verify the credentials, not to make assumptions about the person presenting them. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "You're expected. I'll call ahead." He made the call. She waited. Somewhere inside the installation, a unit was running its morning routine. People who were good at some things and struggling with others. A room where some voices were heard and some weren't, for reasons that had accumulated over time and hadn't been examined recently. Patterns that served people and patterns that had quietly become the thing protecting the blind spot instead of the thing protecting the mission. She was going to go in and look at all of it, accurately, without assuming, without dismissing the person who noticed the thing everyone else had filed away. The gate officer completed his call and looked up. "You're clear, Commander." He opened the gate. She walked through. Nobody was watching. There was no audience for this moment, no recognition, no acknowledgement. Just a woman in a gray shirt walking into a military installation in the rain, carrying her bag, doing the work that she had always known mattered, even in the long stretches when the work was invisible. Especially then. The things that held, the ones that actually held, that were still standing after everything was over and the architects of the damage had been accounted for, were never the systems. They were the people inside the systems who had looked at what was true and had chosen, in the specific moment when it would have been easier not to write it down. She walked across the wet pavement toward the main building. The gate closed behind her.